Okay. Good morning. Okay, Tov, Shavuot Tov, Chodesh Tov. Come back. Here we are. So we are continuing on Hilchot Birkat Hamazon, Tzurba B'Rabanan, volume 14. We're going to pick up in the middle of shir number 4, which is on page 131. We started last week. There was no shir, but the week before we began the halachot of Birkat Hamazon. We got up to the question of how much bread one needs to eat. At what point does one become obligated in the bracha, in the brachot of Birkat Hamazon? Interesting question which comes up because, as we discussed, the chiyuv, the obligation of Birkat Hamazon is learned out from the psukim. As we know, v'achalta, v'savata, u'berachta et Hashem Elokeh. That is the pasuk that says you will eat and be satisfied and you will bless. Birkat Hamazon, according to everybody, is a chiyuv deoraita, a biblical obligation. Question is exactly when and exactly what composes that biblical obligation. That may have some interesting ramifications. So on page 131, the Gemara over here in Masechet Brachot says, source number 10, it says, Ad kama mezamnim. So here the question is phrased, we discussed previously about a zimun, meaning in terms of how much does one have to eat in order to be obligated in the zimun. But you'll see Tosfot here points out, source number 11, Tosfot says, Hu adin Birkat Hamazon below zimun. Right? This halakha, which we're about to discuss, applies equally for not just for the zimun, but in terms of the obligation for Birkat Hamazon itself. So going back to number 10, says the Gemara, we have here machloket. Akam mezamnim ad kazayit, the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that once you've eaten a kazayit, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad kabeitza. Okay, so these are very common measurements which are familiar to us from many different areas of halakha. A kazayit, which is the smaller measure, which is the size of an olive. Kabeitza, which is the size of an egg, which is a little bit bigger. That is the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to the minimum amount which one has eaten, whereby one would need to say Birkat Hamazon. However, we learned that the Torah said, the Pasuk said, v'achalta v'savata u'berachta. We discussed this a little bit, some of the idea behind this last time. But once you've eaten and you have been satiated. So in most cases, eating just a kazait or eating a kabeitza would not be enough when to reach that level of being satiated. So what does it mean over here when the Gemara says kazait or kabeitza? Does that mean midoraita, or does it mean no? Midoraita on a biblical level, you'd only be obligated once you've eaten your fill. However, midrabanan, I would add in, I would say even already after a kazait or kabeitza, you would have to say Birkat Hamazon. What would be the nafkamina? We'll discuss soon. Right? The fact is that Birkat Hamazon being a bracha which is doraita, as opposed to most other brachot, maybe all other brachot, which are drabanan. So we have a principle of safek brachot la'aker. When we have a case of doubt, where we're not sure, we would generally say that we would not make a bracha because we're worried about the concern of a bracha lebatala. But the general principle is that safek brachot are la'aker, would be lenient. We would not say the bracha. However, do we only say safek brachot la'aker because most brachot are drabanan? If it is a bracha d'oraita, which Birkat Hamazon is, certainly the first 3 brachot, then maybe we would not say safek brachot la'aker. So if somebody can't remember if they bench, right, you were sitting somewhere, you were doing something, you had your sandwich, and you got back to work, suddenly you remember, oh, I can't remember if I said Birkat Hamazon or not. So we'll discuss the sources soon. But if it's going to be a chiyuv d'oraita, then we'd probably say you would go back and bench again when you can't remember. If it's a chiyuv d'rabanan, then we'd say you would not. So as we've seen, there might be a situation whereby you have a chiyuv d'rabanan to bench, and that would be the difference. So that's our question. Over here, when the Gemara gives this minimum amount, this minimum measurement of the kazait for Rabbi Meir or a kabeitza for Rabbi Yehuda, is that the oraita or drabanan? Usually we don't have this problem because we just eat more. Yeah. So why is it all written? Okay, so you could read it that way. But Chazal understood from the pasuk that the fact that it's all written together, that it's come together to teach you That's the way that Chazal learn it, and that's the tradition we have in terms of that pasuk. But so let's see the Rambam. The Rambam says over here in source number 12. He says, "Mitzvat aseh min Torah levarech achar achilat mazon shneimar ve'achalta v'savata v'arachta Hashem Elokecha." Right? There is a positive mitzvah to say birkat hamazon after eating food, and we learn that from, says the Rambam, and again following on the way Chazal learned the pasuk, that it's all connected together. You eat and you'll be satisfied, and then you will bless. The eino chayav min Torah ela im ken saver. Says the Rambam, this would only apply when you have fulfilled right v'savata, when you are satisfied. Shneimar v'achalta v'savata u'berachta. And now in bold he says, "Midivrei sofrim achal afilu kazayit mevarech acharav." So says the Rambam, "Midivrei sofrim," meaning midrabanan, even if you've only eaten a kazayit, you would still have to say birkat hamazon. You'll see over the page. In that situation, whereby one is not meaning. The chiyuv d'oraita is only when you have eaten and been satisfied. If you've eaten less than that, but you've passed the minimum threshold of a kazayit, that would be the rabbanan. Yes.
So why does one have to eat on the bread? Why can't you have a small piece of bread and you eat it and then you love it?
Hang on, we'll get to that. So that's a separate question. So you're saying what we're discussing now is that when you've eaten, the sum total of what you've eaten has not been enough to satisfy you. Now the question is on. What if you've eaten only a little bit, you've had a kazayit of bread, but the savata you've achieved by eating the chicken and the fish and the meat and the potatoes, whatever it is. So you'll see, in fact, footnote number 8 over the page, says, according to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, that if one is full due to other foods that were eaten with the bread, one must also have birkat hamazon on a biblical level. So that's exactly your point. That's says Rabbi Ovadia. Yes, we're not dealing with if we achieve the savata through the other foods as well, that would be enough to make it a biblical food. But so says the Rambam. Yeah.
But you would have to still eat a kazayis bread, or even less than the kazayis.
No, you have to have kazayis bread. Yeah. So that is the Rambam who says that this is all midrabanan. The Ravid, however, argues. Have a look at source number 13. The Ravid who argues with the Rambam very often, he says, "Ein advarim k'tiknan." This is incorrect. The ein maskimim la'alacha. This is not the way that we will in practice. He says, "The kaim alan achilat kezayit ukabeitza do laitza." Says when and maybe that's exactly the machloket between them is exactly how you read the pasuk when he said v'achalta v'savata. Right? We understood. The Rambam understands that v'achalta v'savata means you would only say birkat hamazon min haTorah when you have been satisfied. How much does it take to eat that? It's a full meal. Says when Chazal came along and said, even if you've eaten a kazayit, that is midin rabbanan. Says the Ravid, no. When the Gemara says how much do you have to eat, you've already eaten a kazayit, that is enough. That midoraita, you then have to say birkat hamazon. Now he brings a very interesting proof. You can argue with the proof, but listen to what he said. Number 13, he says shalei motziin achelim she'achlu kadei savan. Right, so he says that one person could fulfill the obligation for others. Nowadays, far more common, and usually when we bench, everybody says, unless somebody doesn't know how, or but for various reasons, everybody says the brachot for themselves. Once upon a time, it was more common that one person would say the entire birkat hamazon, everybody else would say amen, and that would be sorry. So the truth is, you can still do it. It still works, right? One person says the bracha back. You have to concentrate. You have to have in mind. You have to hear every single word, and then you have to answer amen at the end of those brachot. So says the Ravid. Now we could have a situation. Imagine the following: two people eat together. One person has a whole meal, has eaten kadei savor, right, until he's satisfied. The other person has only eaten a kazayit or a kabeitza. There wasn't enough food, I don't know what. And that person can say that both of them now have to say birkat hamazon. The first one says birkat hamazon. He fulfills the obligation on behalf of the other one as well, and therefore he says that's fine. Now, where does he get that from? How do you prove it? How do we know that that is exactly the case? We can talk about it. But he says, why does that work? That can only work when one person fulfills an obligation on behalf of another when they have an equal obligation. If two people are both obligated in something, the oraita, then that can work. Or if two people are obligated, the one who's fulfilling for somebody else If both of them are obligated midrabanan, it works. If both of them are obligated midoraita, it works. If one of them is obligated only midrabanan, he or she cannot fulfill the mitzvah for the other person, the oraita, because they have a different level of chiyuv. So where this comes up, we discussed once, for example, every week on Friday night, Kiddush, right? We have an obligation to make Kiddush on Friday night. The obligation of Kiddush is an obligation to oraita. The obligation to make Kiddush over wine specifically is drabanan. So the discussion comes up that if one is to say, when we daven on Friday night in shul, and you say Ba'ikulu, and you say the words of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat HaKodesh, by mentioning that, you have, according to many poskim, fulfilled the obligation, the oraita of Kiddush. So a man comes to shul on Friday night, and he davens. He has, on a oraita level, fulfilled Kiddush, still has to fulfill it midrabanan over the cup of wine. Let's say his wife did not come to shul, so she has not said anything yet, and he has not fulfilled it. So she come home. So now the husband has an obligation, midrabanan, of Kiddush. The wife still has an obligation, the oraita of Kiddush. So we have a question: how can somebody who has only a drabanan obligation fulfill the oraita on behalf of somebody else? So there are poskim who say that. Therefore, one should have in mind when they come to daven not to fulfill the obligation of Kiddush, that it's still a chiyuv d'oraita when you come home. The others who say no, that it's not required, because nonetheless we still have a halachic principle of arvut, which means that even if I have fulfilled the mitzvah, I can still do it for somebody else. So, in other words, right now, practically, the man does not. Right now, I don't have the obligation of d'oraita because I've said in Kiddush. But in principle, in general, I do have the d'oraita obligation, and therefore,
does that seem a little true work in every case? So, like if I have a d'oraita and I want to leave it to somebody who's d'oraita, I can do that, can't I?
If you have a greater level here, then you can. But if you have a lower level here, right, doesn't work the other way. But that principle of arvut, that works, for example, that works by mitzvot. Everybody's obligated. It does not apply by Birkot HaNe'anim, by the brachot that we say in food, because you don't want to eat, you don't have to eat. So over here by Birkat HaMazon, if one person is obligated to Birkat HaMazon Rabbanan, they can, and one person is obligated to Oraita, the person who's obligated to Rabbanan cannot fulfill the mitzvah for the person who's obligated to Oraita. So therefore, says the Raiva, that's your proof. You can argue back against the Raiva's proof very easily. Like you said, right? What's the proof that the person? You're basically taking you're taking the conclusion and saying, oh, it must be that since one can fulfill the mitzvah of somebody else, that if one only ate a kazait and the other one ate the whole thing, then both of them have the same level of obligation. But who's to say? Maybe somebody who only ate a kazait has a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Presumably this is what the Rambam would answer that. And therefore you cannot say the bracha to be motzi the other one, the oraita. In any event, so that is a machloket, the Rambam and the Raiva. The Shulchan Aruch, in source number 14, he says the following. He says, "Shi'ur achila levarech aleh birkat hamazon bekazayit." Once we've eaten a kazayit, we have to say birkat hamazon. Doesn't explain if that's d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. Says the Mishnah Berurah, source number 15, Hainu midrabanan. So this is like the Rambam. Aval midoraita eino chayav levarech birkat hamazon. Only once one has eaten enough to be satiated, is it then a chiyuv d'oraita? Okay. So one should have a kazayit. One should have a kazayit. The truth, if there are, it may be other foods, other types of mezonot, what we talked about the kisnin that would mistaref, that would join in as well. And another question that then comes up is: in what period is there a time limit? Is there a period of time in which one has to eat this amount of a kazayit or whatever it may be in order to have the chiyuv of birkat hamazon? By the way, just before we move on, the Mishnah Berurah continues. He quotes from the Sefer Chinuch, and he says. Shiur Sviya mashma Sefer Chinuch. The eino shaveh b'chol adam. Right, this is not equal. This is not an objective measurement, but this is subjective. Ela kol echad yodea shviyato. Each person knows how much we satiate them. V'imdarko tamid le'chol k'dei mechiyato levad. Gam ze nechshav sviya. So the person who generally only eats a small amount. So for that person, a smaller amount would be enough. This it reminds us a little bit of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, somebody who is ill and needs to eat. So again, when we talk about the amount which the amount which somebody eats, by eating we have sort of an objective measurement, but by drinking we have the shiurim. There is malol of which changes from person to person. It depends on how much liquid one can contain in one's mouth. Here it's about how much one eats to become full, but each person it would be a subjective measure. So says the Magen Abraham here in source number 16, on page 133. He says, so a person ate a little bit, and then some time passed, and then they ate a little bit more. You have the time. We're not going to go now into the sources in detail of how we work out what the shir is. That will be in one of the later shirim. But it was called Kedei Achilat Pras, which was in the days of the Gemara the time to consume a half loaf of bread, probably a smaller loaf of bread than we have nowadays. It's somewhere between 3 and 9 minutes, probably, depending on which calculation you go by. But that is that amount of time. If one eats within that amount of time, it's called Kedei Achilat Pras, so then all of it would join together. But if one does not eat, let's assume, for argument's sake, that the time of Kedei Achilat Pras is 4 minutes. So within 4 minutes, a person eats, less than a kazayit, and then 4 minutes later they eat again less than a kazayit. Says the Magen Abraham that would not join together, and that those tiny bits of eating would not obligate them in the bracha achorah. Again, where this comes up, very practical, is on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, a person who needs to eat, right? Somebody who's unwell and eats in what's called shiurim. So eats in these amounts. So they would wait every what's called Kedei Achilat Pras. So there we generally try and be more stringent if we can. So we go initially by 9 minutes, and if not, we eat every 7 minutes, every 4 minutes, whatever it is. But the point is that one eats less than a shir each time, and then one could be eating or drinking the whole day, but would not say a bracha achorah because you're not eating together. So here too, regarding Birkat Hamazon, if a person eats very, very small amounts and it does not together in that time, says the Magen Abraham, there would be no chiyuv of Birkat Hamazon. The Pri Megadim says something different. Pri Megadim, another one of the Achronim, in source number 17, he says, Mir, imachal ad shesava b'Birkat Hamazon chayav min haTorah shachal me'atmat. He says again, go back to the question that was asked earlier, if the whole measurements here of the biblical obligations that one is satisfied, one is satiated, so even if you ate it slowly, but ultimately you ate enough that you're going to, so you didn't eat a kazait within that prerequisite amount of time, but you ate your meal and you are full at the end of the day, then he says you would still have the obligation, even d'oraita, to say Birkat Hamazon. So we have a little bit of a machloket regarding this. Generally speaking, the truth is that if one eats smaller amounts and waits that period of time, probably be harder to reach to be satiated. But says B'zot HaBracha in source number 18, which is again a contemporary sefer on Hilchot Brachot. He sums it up. He says, "Kedei litchayev Birkat Hamazon yesh lechol me'apat shu kazayit." One need to eat a kazayit from the bread. Ideally, it should be done within that amount of time, as the Magen Abraham said, 4 minutes. Again, our poskim will say it's a little bit longer. Skipping now after the brackets, he says, "Yesh shekatvu shetov lachmin lechol hakazayit pad pachot min shalosh dakot ve'shochal levarech Birkat Hamazon." Those say 4 minutes, those say 3 minutes, etc. And then in the second paragraph, he says, "L'dat Pri Megadim im machalpat kedei shviach have Birkat Hamazon af shachal me'at ma'at." Says at the end of the day, if you ate enough bread or you ate enough food that you were satiated, even over a longer period of time, he says, then you would still have to say the bracha, just over the page. He says, that is the Pri Megadim, but this is not so clear according to everybody. He quotes from Moshe Feinstein, who says, okay, so Moshe Feinstein concludes, like the Magen Abraham, that if you did not eat this kazait within this amount of time, you would not say Birkat Hamazon. So ideally, one should eat the kazait, a substantial amount within ideally 3 minutes, not 3 minutes, 4 minutes, if not that 9 minutes. One should eat it in the normal way. And this comes up by Pesach as well. We'll talk about the amount that you have to eat and the amount of time that you have to eat. I don't believe that the Torah expects us to stuff our mouths in a way that is unnatural. The shirim come from a way that is the normal way of eating. A person eats in the normal way within a time frame, and that would be sufficient. Okay, so we mentioned before about one is unsure if they recited Birkat Hamazon. This is the ramification that comes out of this question, whether it's Doraita or the Rabbanan. So you see here on page 135 from the Talmud Yerushalmi, Rabbi Zeira b'Shem Rabbi Yirmiyah Safek Birech Amazono, Safek Lo Birech. Person has a doubt. Person cannot remember whether they recited Birkat Hamazon or not. Tzarich levarech, needs to go back there and bench. The other place this comes up, the idea of where one cannot remember if they've said bracha, they would have to go back. Like we said, usually we say Safek Bachot La'akel. The one exception is Birkat Hamazon. Another exception is Birkat Torah, coming up, relevant to Shavuot, talking about it a little bit later. But Birkat Torah, which there we actually have a machloket. But according to many poskim, Birkat Torah, which we say every morning before we can begin learning, that is, we say it at the beginning of Shachar. But that is, according to many, a view of the Oraita as well. Therefore, the Shagat Arya says that if one forgot, then one can go back, or one can't remember if they said the Bachot or not, they can go and they should say the Bachot again, because it's a Chiyuv the Oraita. And you see here the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, we'll just read the Shulchan Aruch in number 21. He says, Achal, Ve'ino Yadayim Berech Birkat Hamazonim Lav. Person can't remember if they said Birkat Hamazon. Tzarich levarech misafek. Yeah, you would go back and say the bracha mipnei shehim min haTorah, since it is a Torah obligation. Right, exactly. So see the Mishnah Berurah. That's exactly the next point. Source number 22. He said mipnei shehim min haTorah davka shesaber. That is where you are satisfied, and therefore that is you're satiated, and that is a chiyuv d'oraita. However, the ilo savea, if you ate less than that and you were not satiated, so the rova poskim midrabanan. According to many, it is midrabanan. Therefore, you would not go back. So what's the eitzah in such a case? He says, "Mekom makom ha'oil yirei shamayim benistapek im berech lo afilu shelo acha ela kazayit shelitol yadav yivarech hamoti ve'ochal kazayit vorech Birkat Hamazon." So therefore, if you're not sure, especially if you ate less and you only ate a kazayit, so wash your hands and eat some more. And then you'll definitely have to say Birkat Hamazon again. One other point is that, as we learned last time, it's only the first three brachot, which are, even if one is satiated, only the first three brachot of Birkat Hamazon, which are d'oraita. The fourth bracha tova meitiv is midrabanan. So therefore, if one is in this situation, where one is going back and saying it out of doubt, would you say all four brachot, or would you just say the first three? So the Magen Avraham says, even though the fourth bracha is Mirabanan, nonetheless, in such a scenario, you would repeat it. The Lord is we don't come to degrade it, we don't come to belittle it, not to take it seriously. We find sometimes that Rabbanan, with certain things, for example, in the Chot of Yom Tov, this comes down, that since Yom Tov is, in a certain sense, more lenient than Shabbat, because there are melachot that you are allowed to perform on Yom Tov, which you cannot perform on Shabbat. Melechet ochel nefesh. One is allowed to cook on Yom Tov. One is allowed to transfer the fire, etc. Therefore, so when it comes to muktzah, which is a takana d'Rabbanan, the Gemara says that Rabbanan were more machmir, they were more stringent about muktzah on Yom Tov than they were on Shabbat, so that people wouldn't come to be mezalzeh. The people would still take it seriously. So here too, it says from again Abraham, that even though this is a bracha midrabanan, you would still repeat it, so that you take it seriously. Yalkut Yosef disagrees. He says no. He says since all of this is to do with the doubt, he says it's in a case of sapek, that which is a sapek d'oraita, you go back and say that. If it's sapek d'Rabbanan, you would not, and therefore he says not to say Birkat Tova Meitiv. As we saw before in the Mishnah Berurah, in the case of doubt, a person one eitzah is always to go eat a little bit more, and then you would have to say you would certainly be obligated in all these brachas. Okay. Next, yeah. You would say bracha again. You would say hamatzir, because in any event you didn't intend to eat anymore. So if you want to go back and eat, you'd have to say the bracha again, and then you would say Birkat Hamazon, which would cover everything. Yeah. Again, this is a b'diavad situation. It's not like a tefillah, but that is what we could do. Okay, we're now on page 137. Sorry, yeah.
I don't know whether it's good as well, but there are many times in the history where the Shabbat was agreed. So you're still obligated to them?
Yeah, so we spoke about this a little bit at the end of the last year, but we'll come back to it again at the end of prep time. But that's what we saw in page 132, right? If you have a look again in the Mishnah Berurah, source 15, he says at the end, he says, in Dakota midle achol kadei mechiato levad, gam zen yachshav svia. Meaning, if that is what a person is used to, if a person lives, and Baruch Hashem, this is not something which is so practical today, but if what a person is used to is a very, very small amount, that is considered their svia, and that is what would obligate them in that bracha.
Even if that's less than kazayas?
Okay, if that's less than a kazayas, then siminion. But if all that a person would ever eat is less than a kazayas, would they be saying that in very extreme situations?
Of bread, less than a kazayas of bread.
Less than a kazayas of bread. So again, the mashmaot, the pastor of Big Ma would seem to be that from a kazayas an apple. Less than a kazayas, probably not. Just saying if it's extreme that it becomes subjectively for a person that becomes less than a kazayas. I'm not sure. That's a good, interesting question. Okay. What about page 137? The Gemara has a discussion whether women are obligated in Birkat Hamazon or not. Well, you say the bottom line, at the end of the day, everybody agrees that women are obligated in Birkat Hamazon. What's not clear is whether it's Doraita or Drabanan. The question is why? Why would you think? We discussed a little bit when we spoke about Zimun. We saw there was a machloket whether women are obligated in Zimun as well or not. Why would one think that women would be exempt from Birkat Hamazon? Birkat Hamazon is not a mitzvah to say Shazman Ibrahim. It's not a time-bound mitzvah, right? You would have to do whenever you eat. There's not a specific day or a specific time or a specific time of the year in which one has to say Birkat Hamazon. So the Gemara. Really, there are two answers that are given. It's a machloket Rashi and Tosfot. The Gemara in source number 25, the Mishnah says, "Nashim chayavin b'tfilah b'mezuzah b'kat hamazon." In amongst the list of different mitzvot, says that women are obligated in b'kat hamazon. Says the Gemara, and if the Mishnah needs to tell us that there is an obligation, it means that there is reason to think that there would not be. Says the Gemara, "Mar le'Ravina le'Rabba, nashim b'kat hamazon de'oraita." Or the Rabbanan. So it asks the question, is the chiyuv, Doraita or Rabbanan? Lemay nafkamina. What is the nafkamina? What is the practical difference it's going to make? So this is something we already spoke about in a different context. But right, in order to fulfill the mitzvah for others, Eid amal Doraita. What we already explained. If a woman has an obligation, the Doraita of Birkat Hamazon, so ati Doraita, mapik Doraita. Then she could say Birkat Hamazon on behalf of somebody else. We are now both obligated to write it. But if you were to say that the chiyuv here is only rabbinic, so that would therefore mean that conceptually a woman would not be able to say Birkat Hamazon on behalf of a man if she is only obligated midrabanan and he's obligated midorai. Why would we think that women would only be obligated midrabanan? Why would it be that the Torah would exempt women from Birkat Hamazon? So two different answers here, and it's actually both are related to what we say. And it's fascinating when you think about it, the brachot, we know there are essentially four brachot of Birkat Hamazon. The first three from the Torah, Birkat Hazan, the bracha we say about the food. Again, if it was up to us, and we were to ask, we were to think, you have to compose a bracha, you have to compose a blessing of thanks after eating, what would you include in it? You would include probably thanks for the food, and that's probably where you would end, right? So Birkat Hazan, that is the first bracha. The Torah says, no, there's a little bit more than that. You have to say bracha ala Aretz. You have to talk about Eretz Yisrael. You have to talk about Yerushalayim. What on earth does that have to do with eating? What does that have to do with every meal? But it's teaching us here something about perspective, teaching us something about the things that are important, the things we think about, the things we give thanks about every single time that we eat. And there are certain things that are mentioned that have to be mentioned in those brachot. So Rashi says, number 26, he says, right, part of Birkat Hamazon, and this is from the Pasuk, where it says, you give thanks to Hashem, you bless him, for the land, the good land which he has given him. And he says, and he says, when the land was apportioned to Bnei Israel in the time of Yeshua, it was done through the families, it was done through the males and not the females. There is one exception where we see the case of Bnot Tzlachad, Right? In Mishum Benot Slavchad, he says, however, there was an exception. They came and took their father's portion because he was from Yotzei Mitzrayim, and the whole story over there. So because of the way that the land was a portion and the ownership of the land was given to men and not to women, therefore, says Rashi, that is why we would think that women are exempt from Birkat HaMazon, because those words, that praise is not necessarily as relevant. Tosfot focuses on something else. Tosfot here in source number 27 over the page. He says, Elayesh Lomar, Yadama Dichtiv, Al Britcha Shachadamta B'Sarenu, Vel Toratcha Shelimatani. So whereas Rashi focused on the Pasuk and the origin of Birkat HaMazon, Tosfot here focuses on the words of the Brachot themselves. There is, by the way, a machloket, I won't get into it now, but a major machloket amongst the Rishonim as to what is the extent of the Chiyuv D'Oraita of Birkat HaMazon. Meaning, is it that the Torah just specified there have to be 3 specific brachot? Is it that the Torah just specified there are 3 concepts which have to be mentioned, but it could have been in one bracha? Is it that certain parts of the content of each bracha was specified by the Torah? I mean, where does the level of Torah obligation end, and where is it formulated by the rabbi? That is a discussion amongst the Rishonim. The Tosfot here focuses on the words of the bracha themselves. And in Birkat HaMazon, we say, so we relate to Brit Milah, and we relate to Al Toratcha Shlimartan, we relate to Limud Torah. Now, both of these are mitzvot in which men are obligated and women are not obligated. Mein Kiddushin goes through and discusses exactly how we know and where the obligation comes from for each, or the exemption for men and for women. But since these mitzvot are mentioned, and says Tosfot here, it's involved. V'nashim leitnu lo b'brit v'lo b'torah, meaning since women are not obligated in terms of Brit Milah, in terms of giving their children Brit Milah either, or v'lo b'torah, or in Limud Torah, v'amrinan lakaman, mi shelo amar Brit v'torah Birkat HaMazon lo yatsa yedei chovato, says the Gemara that somebody who does not mention these 2 concepts, does not mention these mitzvot, does not fulfill their obligation, so therefore that is not part of the those who are not obligated in these mitzvot would not be obligated in Birkat HaMazon either. V'ashta kame ba'ele, kevan de lo matzu lamem abrit v'torah lo avu ela midrabanan, o dilma kevan de lo shayach bu havei shapir d'oraita. So essentially, the Gemara is asking the question: does that therefore mean that women are still going to be obligated midrabanan, or is it that that even d'oraita there would be a chiyuv? So the Shulchan Aruch, source number 28, he says, Nashim chayavot Birkat HaMazon. At the end of the day, everybody would agree that women are obligated in Birkat HaMazon. However, safeku imen chayavot midoraita u'motziot et hanashim, or im einan chayavot ela midrabanan ve'einan motziot ela mishem chayavot ela midrabanan. So we have a safek, we have a doubt at the end of the day as to whether this is a chiyuv d'oraita or chiyuv d'rabanan. So therefore, to connect to the previous topic that we discussed, where we said if somebody does not remember, they said Birkat HaMazon, only if it's a chiyuv d'oraita, would you go back and say the brachot again? So that is all good and well for a man who is certainly mechuyav midoraita. If a woman can't remember if she said Birkat HaMazon, so now there is a safek. But it might be a safek, d'oraita, but it might be a safek d'rabanan. So should you go back then and say it again? So says the Mishnah Berurah number 29. He says, "Mivnei shu safek," since this is a doubt. Naktin and the en motzim d'achlim she'achlu kadei shviyah. Okay, so that is regarding the previous point that we say that a woman cannot fulfill the mitzvah for somebody else who is mechuyav d'oraita. Katav b'shar Ephraim, isha she'achla kadei shviyah v'nistabka in bercha. So he first quotes a number of Achronim who say, actually, yes, if a woman cannot remember, has a doubt whether she needs to go back and say Birkat HaMazon, that she should go back and say Brachot. But he quotes Rabbi Akiva Eiger, who says no, you should not go back and say it again. So he says, really, this is a safek, it's a machloket. Since we have found that there is an opinion that you could go back and say Birkat HaMazon again, if you want to do that, that is okay. It would not be a bracha levatala, but it would not be required. Yalkut Yosef suggests that if you contemplate the words in your mind, without saying them out loud, then there is certainly no bracha levatala, and that would be enough to satisfy the opinions here that it is required. Okay, on to the next topic, which is on page 140. The question is, we asked about how much one needs to eat. For how long can one still say the katamazon? A person ate a meal, you're sitting at a very long Shabbos meal, or you went out to a wedding or something, and you've eaten, and the speeches is going on and on and on. It's been 3 hours since you last ate. Can you still come now and say Birkat HaMazon? So we have a sugya in the Gemara in Brachot. The Mishnah asks this question. It says, Ad matay mevarech. We're on page 140. The Mishnah says, Ad matay mevarech. Ad kedei shitakel hamazon shebeme'av. Until the food has become digested. Okay, how do we know how long that takes until the food has been digested? So we have a... What? Okay. Says the Gemara, what are we referring to? The idea is that you can still say the bracha so long as your meal, so long as the eating that you, at least the first stage of your eating is still ongoing. But once that stage has been completed, one could no longer say the bracha. So we have machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, how long this goes on for, what we are referring to. Kama shurit, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kozman she'eno ha'eh. So Rabbi Yochanan says, so long as you aren't yet hungry again, okay, that is the parameter. A person eats and a person is full, then if when you that eating, that meal has satiated, so long as that meal has satiated you, you can still say the bracha. But once a person it becomes hungry again, so it's kind of reset, and therefore you can no longer say the bracha. Reish Lakish says a little bit differently. Reish Lakish Amar calls man sheyitzma mechamat achilato. So he says so long as he is thirsty as a result of his eating, and the Gemara goes on, and it says actually Reish Lakish differentiates between different types of meals. Reish Lakish really says this. Okay, so we have a statement of Reish Lakish saying that the amount of time that it takes to walk for meal. Okay, this is a shir that we find in the Gemara in a number of different contexts. Generally accepted that this is 72 minutes. Okay, so he says maybe it's that amount of time. He says lo kasha kan b'achila mu'ba kan b'achila mu'etet. So Reish Lakish distinguishes between different types of meals. If it's a larger meal, or if it's a smaller meal, then it comes up with we have here the shir of essentially 72 minutes. But many of the Rishonim hold like Rabbi Yochanan, which was the first opinion, which says so long as one is still full from the meal in the first place, then one can still bench. So you see Rabbi Yonah, source number 32. He says, "Kozman she'eno ra'ev mechamat ota achila, aval misha'a shematchil liot ra'ev, af al pi shelo nitakel adayin legamrei." He says, once a person starts to become hungry again, כיוון שמתחיל לתקל כמו שמתקל לגמרי, דעניין עליו, ואינו מברך עליו אחר כך. He says, from that point, then one can no longer say Birkat HaMazon. So you shouldn't wait too long until you start to get hungry again. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, number 33. He says, "Adei matai yachol levarech, ad sheyitakel hamazon shebneah," quoting the Mishnah, "v'kama shiur kol zman she'eno ra'ev mechamat ota achila." So long as one is no longer, or one doesn't get hungry again from that meal. And again, this is generally accepted as a time. This is at least 72 minutes. There are poskim, there are sources here that say that it might even be longer than that. But we generally accept that it's going to be within those 72 minutes. That would be fine. You can see the Mishnah brought over the page, number 37. It says, "Katvu Abei Achonim the Mishalina Bazeh ad kedei hiluch alba milim shehu ein bet minute." Right, 72 minutes. ועד כדי שזה מחויב לברך שבוודאי לא נתקל אפילו אכילה מועטת בשום מועט כזה. We assume that even a small amount of food has not been digested in that amount of time. So that is why sometimes a person is sitting at a meal that's very, very long, or a person is eating while they're doing other things, or taking a break, whatever it is. So it became so long as within every 72 minutes you have something to eat, you take another bite or something, then that is okay. He summarized it. I'll let you look at that in the book afterwards. It's going to get onto the next topic as well. But he says also that if it's after 72 minutes, but one is still not hungry, then there is still room to carry on benching. Yeah. Yeah. If you're still full, yeah. If it's he said over here. I mean, if a person, what happens then is if a person's not sure. So he said you can have a look. Source number 38. Have a look at that. He says here. He says Sha'ay yoter m-72 dakot on page 143. Dalet. He says it's been more than 72 minutes. V'umusupak im ra'ev. Now a person's not sure if they're hungry again or not. So yachol levarech b'kat hamazon misapek. He says that you can say the bracha out of doubt. B'tnai she'achar mitchila pat kishur svia. So long as initially you ate enough that you were satiated again, so that would be therefore din doraita. Lekatchila tov leachol kazayifat itnei b'kat hamazon b'chol mekeshu mitzupak v'nitakel hamazon. If you're not sure, then the best thing to do is go and then eat some more, as we said before. The share of 72 minutes gives us an objective benchmark. We say that within that time, then we are certain that it's still okay. Beyond that, it starts getting subjective. Beyond that, it starts becoming a suffix, and then we're not sure. So it's better not to get to that point. But that's what he says. Even if that time has passed, actually in bet, this is where he says it. So he just 2 paragraphs up. He says b'diavad afin kvar avu 72 dakot yachol levarech kol zman she'eno ra'ev mechamat otah achila. Even if more than 72 minutes have passed, so long as one is still not hungry from that meal, then then he could then one could still bench. Okay, let's just have a look at. Skip to page 149, just the last couple of minutes, a little bit about the proper manner to recite Birkat Hamazon. The fact that Birkat Hamazon is a bracha d'oraita has a number of ramifications, not just for questions of doubt, but also in terms of the proper respect and the proper kavod that one has to give to it. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, Tarich she'ashmi'a le'oznav, source number 48. Tarich she'ashmi'a le'oznav ma shemotzi b'sfatav. Right, it's not enough to just say in one's head. One has to actually pronounce the words. So long as the words were enunciated with one's lip, even if it's very softly, if one's whispering, that is okay. But the words need to be said. Number 49. So somebody comes and starts talking to you in the middle of Birkat Hamazon. Says Yesh mi shomer shedina kitzvila. There are those who say it has the same. That would have the same din as tefillah, the same din as Shmona Esrei, and we find for many aspects Birkat Hamazon is compared to the way that a person says Shmona Esrei, the same way. Person stands still without any interruption, without so too in Birkat Hamazon, one's not standing for Birkat Hamazon. We'll go there in a moment, but it has to be said in the same place, and it has to be said with the same level of concentration, without interruption as well. The Gemara then talks about in source number 51, talks about whether one could say Birkat Hamazon standing or walking, etc. Says Amar Rabbi Abahu, v'amrilav manitatana ha'ochel u'mehalech. If one was eating whilst walking, it says mevarech mu'mad, then one could according to this opinion, one could then say Birkat Hamazon while standing. Uksheochel mu'mad mevarech minusha. Meaning, one was walking to eat, they should stand still to bed. Uksheochel mu'mad, if they were standing to eat, mevarech minusha, they should sit down to bed. Uksheomesei bo'ochel yoshev b'o. And if they were eating whilst reclining, which nowadays you only do on Pesach, but then they should sit up to bench. And it says v'hilchata. However, the bottom line is that we should, at the end of the day, the halacha is one needs to sit down for Birkat Hamazon, and this is what the Shulchan Aruch says, source number 53. One needs to sit down. It shouldn't be walking from one place to another, whatever. The person needs to bend. They need to stop. They need to sit, and they need to do it in that way. In order to have the proper concentration. Yeah. So very good. Person, just find a place to stop, sit down and bench.
Somebody buys the falafel and works.
Okay, so they should find a place to sit down at the end in order to go. Yeah. The truth is that it's better. There's a whole discussion. We're not going to go into it now, but if you see footnote number 28, we're referring to a number of different sources, some articles online as well. The whole idea of if you look in the Gemara, Chazal were not too fond of people just walking and eating or sitting in the marketplace and sitting outside. Cultural things have changed, and the question is, how does the change in cultural norms affect the halakha as well? So there is a discussion over there, but certainly when it comes to the Birkat Hamazon, one should be seated. Another question which comes up, and we'll end with this for today, is if somebody is traveling, so somebody is in a car, right? And what happens in terms of, so if one is seated and can recite Birkat Hamazon in that way, if a person is on a plane and traveling and eating, you're sitting down in your seat, you say Birkat Hamazon like that. The poskim do discuss, and I have to say, I read this, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it. We'll read it and I'll say regarding somebody who's driving. So somebody who ate something and then you're on the way, you're eating while driving, and you bench while driving. So there is a discussion over here. I'm going to read what it says, then I'll give you my opinion at the end. Now, the Piskei Tzurba, number 57, page 152, he says, "B'shulchan aruch katav, shanoeg ba'agala u'ba'bema, yichra ma'alech b'derech." Somebody, so it says in the Shulchan Aruch, it's also in the book as well. But if there's somebody who's riding on a wagon, etc., it's like somebody who's walking who's a traveler on a journey. And when they allowed somebody who is traveling to bench, so too for somebody who's riding. So he wants to learn from there. So he wants to extrapolate from that the same thing to somebody who's driving in a car to say all these brachot. And they would not be required to stop the car. So he says, if you ate or drank while you had stopped, while you had parked, so then you would have to say the bracha achona while you are parked as well. That part I agree with, and therefore you cannot do that while driving. I say, in my humble opinion, to say that a person does not have to stop their car in order to bench, I think is quite reckless. It's a danger. It's a danger on the road. A person is driving. A person needs to concentrate. There is no way that a person can drive with the full concentration and do Birkat Hamazon with the adequate concentration at the same time. It's an impossibility. So I would humbly suggest, therefore, that one should, if it's one bracha, a person saying shakol, like taking a sip of water or something, it's one thing. But let's say Birkat Hamazon, you're driving Kfish Shesh and or whatever it is nowadays, people text and drive and do this, that. But I think part of part of the responsibility, the person has to, take these things seriously. The person has to have full concentration while they're driving as well. So forget about the concentration for the way that it would distract you. So I would say, therefore, that if one is driving in the car, one would stop the car, find a place to park, and then bench. Don't bench while driving. I'd come.
That's something you're thinking does not extend to the passenger.
No. I'm talking about the driver. I'm not talking about the passenger. The passenger. So that may be a solution. That let's say in such a case, a person has nowhere they could stop. But the passenger says, "Birkat Hamazon," you answer a man. Okay, there it's also a little bit complicated because you have to concentrate. But nonetheless, I'm sorry too.
But I'm very happy that we are going to see some of our things.
Very nice.
Because
Okay.